Brews Light. I believe we are on number 58, and I would like to welcome Kam Knight to the program. So it's nice to have you. You have a very interesting book, which I always say to authors, but if you didn't have an interesting book, I wouldn't have invited you on the program. So
Yeah. Well,
it's
thank
not
you.
me.
Yeah, thank you
But
for having me. And I'm actually an author of a dozen books, and I have a few of them. So I would like to think I have at least a few that are somewhat interesting.
yeah, and I think they're all nonfiction, correct?
Yes, I've been more of a nonfiction person,
Mhm.
and not to say that there's anything wrong with fiction. It's just growing up, I just naturally wasn't drawn to it. I know a lot of
Mhm.
people love stories, especially fantasy novels and movies. But it wasn't anything that I was really interested in, and it did kind of was a challenge as I was growing up because a lot of the people I knew, and when we're younger, we do like the stories, the fantasies, the Disney movies, the Star Wars, and all of that. But it wasn't what naturally drew me or what
Mhm.
my brain released positive chemicals that wanted me to move forward in that direction. It was always the more nonfiction, more reality based. And
Mhm.
then as I got older, I was really fascinated about the mind and its inner workings. And in a lot of ways, my books are on the topic of that.
Right. I find that interesting just because my experience is I was drawn much more to fiction, and I sort of assume most people are. Although when I think about it, my dad was, he had an MS in something or other. He had lots of books on physics and things like that. So I can remember being about first grade trying to read his books on physics. And,
Yeah.
I look back as an adult and go, why, as a first grader, did I feel I needed to read a book on physics? But I did. So I guess in some ways I was drawn to nonfiction.
Yeah.
Um, so give a little background about yourself.
All right. So my name is Kam Knight. I am a mentor, international speaker, and an author of a dozen books in the area of mental, physical, and emotional performance. And as far back as I can remember, I've been a fairly driven individual. It's hard not to be living in this culture and society with so much personal development content. I mean, it's in our social media feeds, it's in our movies, it's Oprah. Everyone's kind of telling you to do more and
Yep.
inspiring you to be your best self. And so as I was growing up, I received a lot of that. And as a result of that, I did want to do more, have more, and accomplish more in life. And although I've had my fair share of success, and I say fair in a very nuanced way because it wasn't as much or as big as I would have liked or as I was actually going after. And I always wondered why that was. Like, why is it if I want to do something, I know what to do, I know how to do it, and I have the motivation, desire to do it, but for one reason or another, I can or don't do it. And at the time, there weren't a lot of good answers. The best answers I was coming across was beliefs or that you need motivation and discipline. A lot of the obvious stuff that we kind of know intuitively, but I felt like there was more to it than that. And over the past 15 to 20 years, that question lingered in my mind. Every time I felt stuck, I wondered why. Why can't I do this thing? Why do I keep spinning my wheels? Why don't I just finish this thing so I can get the result that I want? And the more books I read, and the more coaching I did, and the more seminars I attended, the more I learned about the complexities of not just the brain, but what's going on internally and the human experience. And over time, my brain just kind of started coming to this concept of wait, there's a part of our mind designed to hold us back. There's a part of us that's built to keep us from growing and making progress.
Why would that be? Why would our mind want to hold us back? Or why would we be designed that way?
Yeah, so it's really interesting. And the best way to think about this is the part of the brain that creates wants and desires, it actually works separate from the part that allows us to act on the desire. Very important. So I'm going to say it one more time. The part of the brain that creates desires works separate and independent from the part that actually allows us to act on the desire. So we have one part of the mind that is creating wants and desires and aspirations. And in a way, it's kind of unrestrained. Its job was never to check to see if we had the time, energy, and resources to do it. Its job is really just to create. And it's like a on-off switch that kind of gets triggered. So anytime we see something or hear about something, we're stimulated to want it, to be drawn to it, and to be pulled towards it. But then we have this other part of the brain that checks to see if we have the time, energy, resources, or if it's worth doing. And this is a part that evaluates if we should go after the want. And what's really interesting is the way it evaluates it is that anytime we have a desire or a want, it goes through a whole checklist of items to see if we should do it. If,
Okay.
and if all the things aren't checked off, it will prevent us from taking action. And so a great analogy for this is thinking about standing before a panel of judges or a board of directors. Any and every decision that comes up must go through them. And if even one of the members is against the idea, it won't pass. And so it's kind of the reason why a lot of times we could want something and not be able to do it. Because interestingly enough, the same brain can create a desire for something and not have us go after it. So this is where kind of people feel that struggle.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And now remind me, are you reading from your speed reading book or the book about internal resistance today?
So my speed reading is the book right here, the yellow
Yeah.
one. I am going to actually be reading from my book Concentration, which is the start of the topic of internal resistance. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Now you have kind of an interesting story about how you ended up writing some of these books. I believe you were studying to be a CPA, certified,
Public
I know
accountant.
this, public accountant, yes.
Yeah.
I was going to write that out on my notes, and then I said, I know what a CPA is. And then, of course, so obviously I need your book on memory.
So that book on memory, one of the first chapters I talk about is don't assume that just because information is easy or valuable, that your brain will remember it, because that's not the criteria the brain uses when it's deciding what information to keep or not. And this is a fallacy a lot of people fall into is they come across information and they're like, oh yeah, that's easy, or I know that and I'll remember it. And so they don't do anything to remember it. And then of course
don't write it down, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, you were on your path to become a CPA, and the first time pass rate for the test is only 15%, I think you said.
Yeah.
And
go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was gonna say the format has changed now, but back then it was one of the most difficult certification exams at the time. And it had a first time pass rate of only 15%. So it was extremely hard. Exam was 2 days long, and yeah.
And so in the process of studying for this, you started to come across a lot of these ideas that you now write about. So I was curious as I read that, did this entirely derail becoming a CPA, or did you end up working as a CPA and writing?
A little bit of both. So when I was studying, when I made the decision to sit down and study for the CPA, for some reason I just had this thought of maybe I should take some time to learn how to study and remember better, because at the time I spend up front could hopefully save me time in the long run. And I wish a lot of more people had that thinking, because it would have helped them in that exam or another area.
Right.
Because for me, it was huge. And I learned certain techniques and systems of learning and reading and remembering. And I thought to myself that if I had been taught this when I was younger, I would have done way better in school. In fact, it made me realize that this concept of genius and prodigy, it really doesn't exist. I think if we use the right techniques and systems, we can operate just as well as the people that we call genius. It's just that geniuses seem to have figured out how to do it on their own. But
well, that's interesting. My husband and I actually both through no cause or fault of our own, both had professional IQ tests when we were children.
Yeah.
And I find it very funny that we actually are both in the genius range.
Yeah.
My IQ is 1 point higher than his, and we always
Ah,
joke about that. But the fact is, he's gone a very different route in life, whereas I went music and writing
mhm.
and taking care of children. He's working in quantum computing and just things that very few people on this earth can even talk to him about. You
Yeah.
know, it's a very small pool. So I think you're very right. And I'm not discounting what I've done. I've absolutely loved teaching music lessons and, you know, obviously value raising kids well. That's important. But I do find that a very interesting point
Yeah.
that I see in my own life. In theory, I'm 1 point smarter than he
Yeah.
is, but I couldn't do what he does.
Yeah. And I think if a person wanted to do what he does, they could do it if they learn the right
Well,
ways.
and that to me is part of the interesting question. I don't think that anybody could, and I may be wrong. You know, maybe your studies, you know, let's say if somebody had an IQ of 75 to 80, do you think that if they really set their mind to it, they could become a rocket scientist or a neurosurgeon or work in quantum physics?
I wouldn't say no, they couldn't. I would have to understand and meet the person to know where they were at
Mhm.
and why they got that low score. Because
Yeah.
interestingly enough, a lot of people who do poorly on exams isn't because they don't know the information or they're not smart. It's just that they're not good test takers. Like
Mhm.
there's very highly capable people in a lot of fields who
Yeah.
who just aren't doing as well as they could because they're just
Right.
not good exam takers. And that's one piece of it. But also, if a person can learn systems and ways of remembering, thinking, reading, processing, and recalling, it could make a huge difference on a lot of people's
Right.
lives. And I've seen it happen over and over.
Right, and definitely, and that's why people take the practice SATs and things
Yeah,
like that. And I've always wondered, I don't know why it's been on my mind lately, but I kind of want to take sample Mensa tests until I learn all the tricks.
yeah,
And it's kind of the same thing. I suspect that if you did enough puzzle books and things like that, that your brain would be learning some of these.
yeah,
And it would, to an extent, be like remembering a joke that you go to take the Mensa test and it's like you might not be a genius really, but
yeah,
if you've been doing puzzle books for 10 years, you might recognize half the things on there. And I don't know what's on the Mensa test.
yeah,
I suspect it's more than just puzzles.
yeah.
I think I've seen samples, but yeah.
Yeah, and I'll say two things about this. One is now we're talking about huge extremes, like 75 to 180 is huge.
Mhm.
So maybe that might not be possible. But I definitely think when we're looking at smaller ranges, going from 110 to 130 and 40, I definitely think that's possible for
Yeah,
a larger variety of people or a larger audience. The
yeah,
second
I
thing I was
agree.
the second thing I will say is, so I've traveled quite a bit. I've traveled to over 100 countries. And in my travels, it's given me an opportunity to experience interesting things that I wouldn't have seen. For example, being in developing nations where people just don't have any opportunity to go
Mhm.
to school and to learn. And if you would talk and interact with them, you would think they're at a 70 or 80 IQ. Like, no doubt,
Mhm.
without a doubt. But they're extremely skilled with their hands. They
Uh-huh.
might be very skilled tailor. They might be a very skilled carpenter and things of that nature.
Right,
And those are indications that they have enough intelligence to be able to do something that majority of the people couldn't do. So it's
right.
not just so much the intelligent piece,
And
but also the
and I think too, you make the comment somewhere on your site, and by the way, you need to update your site because it says you've been to nearly 100. Sounds
it
like you've
is.
traveled to a few more since then.
Since then,
Um,
I did tip over to over 100. Yeah.
okay. You make the point, or you make the statement that intelligence is overrated.
Yeah.
And I think that's very true. You know, that especially in America, we live in a world where we're very focused on things like wealth and intelligence.
Yeah.
And as I grew up, education and intelligence was really pushed.
Yeah.
And from a very early age, I thought, you know, we should be pushing character. And as you say, skills. We need skills. And if everybody is, you know, 180 IQ sitting around theorizing about great things, we're all going to starve to death.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And so we really do need to keep our priorities straight. Intelligence is great. You know, it accomplishes great things if, as you say, you use what you have
Yeah.
and use it well. So what book are you going to read from? I know you just told me this, and that's why I
Yeah.
need your memory book.
So my book, Concentration, maintain laser sharp focus and attention for stretches of 5 hours or more. I know it's a big claim, but I'm pretty confident I can deliver. And I'm going to talk about a concept called, you know, we started with our wants and how when we have a desire, it gets filtered through resistance, and resistance doesn't let us do it. We can't act. But I also want people to understand our own wants and desires can create challenges and be the very thing that keeps us from going after them, as well as finding fulfillment. So if you're ready, I can get started.
I'm ready. Yes,
Okay.
and while you open up your book, I would like to ask people to please like, subscribe, share, leave comments, and visit our sponsor, Gabriel's Horn Press. Go ahead with your reading.
All right, thank you. So I'm just going to get started. So as the completion of this book, I've traveled to nearly 100 countries around the world. After traveling to enough places, I inevitably began to see a pattern in history, a standard story that plays out over and over, time and time again, no matter what part of the world I visited. It's the story of sultans, kings, and emperors fighting wars, battles, and conflicts to gain empires, kingdoms, and nations. As I learned about these rulers and visited their castles, palaces, and mansions, I saw firsthand how lavishly they lived. You can't imagine how much one person could own: wardrobes to clothe a town, rooms the size of houses, driveways as long as blocks, lawns as extravagant as parks, along with the maids, cooks, doctors, and therapists to populate a town. As I delved into the lives of these rulers, I began to see something else. I saw just how unfulfilled and miserable they were. No matter how much wealth, power, admiration, and status they acquired, they were never satisfied. Whether a sultan of the Middle East, king of Europe, or emperor of Asia, the story was the same. They always wanted more and more and more. They kept expanding their empire, growing their wealth, and widening their influence. And for what? To have more of what they already had. For many of these rulers, the need for more was the root of their demise. The likes of Alexander the Great, Julius Caesar, and Napoleon Bonaparte conquered some of the largest empires the world has known, yet lost everything they had, including their lives, in the attempt for more. So again, this goes back to our wanting mechanism is
Mhm.
unrestrained. It was never meant to check itself. It's just meant to keep creating wants. And if we don't realize that, we can get lost in all the wants
Right,
that it's
right.
producing. And it could be the very thing that keeps us from achieving any of the wants.
I wanted to throw something out here in relation to what you were saying about opportunity. I recently came across, here in Tennessee, we have a used bookstore called McKay's, that's like Acres and Acres. And I came across this fantastic book called Outliers.
Oh, yeah.
And it was talking about opportunity. It opened up with the author and his wife noticing at a hockey game that all these great hockey players were mostly born within a few months of each other. The majority of their birthdays, I think, were like January, February, March, and maybe April. And the more he delved into this, he found it wasn't a coincidence. It was that when you're very young and your parents are starting you, in this case on hockey, because your birthday is earlier in the time frame of when they make this age delineation, you're the one who's a little bit bigger and a little bit stronger as, say, a 4-year-old.
Yeah.
Therefore, you get put on the higher level team, and that higher level team gives you more practice time. So it has nothing to do with the birthday, but simply the fact that they made the cutoff, say end of December, whatever. And so the biggest kids at that age, there's a noticeable difference. And so all through the ranks, because they've had more practice to begin with, they're the ones who keep advancing. And I thought that was a very interesting comment on how much we think it's pure talent and maybe working harder. But in this case, it's literally, well, not, I'm going to say not entirely. There were definitely some born later in the year, but it was largely a matter of luck when you happen to be born.
And if it had to do with genes and talent, then Einstein's kids would have been great. Michael Jordan's kids would have done great. All these superstars that we see, their kids would have been just as super, and you rarely see that. Very rare. Yeah, sure, it happens once in a while where the son of an athlete also becomes a professional or famous athlete, but it's very rare. So
That's interesting. Because by
Yeah.
contrast, I was told probably like 35 years ago, because I'm in music, it was of interest to me that virtually every single professional orchestral musician had a parent who was very good at music and very into music. And I was taking lessons at the time with David Ritt in the Seattle Symphony. And when I told him that, he said, when I think about it, he said, yes, most of my colleagues do have parents who are professional musicians, although there's always one of the guys I went to college with on trombone. He is a professional trombonist with the Arkansas State Orchestra, and his father, if I remember, was a plumber and owned a gym. So it always depends. How badly does someone want something? And what are the blocks that you're talking about in the brain that prevent us going after what we want?
So it goes pretty deep. It's not as simple as, well, this is a block and this is how you get over it. If it was that simple, I'd be a billionaire because I could get people to overcome their blocks easily when they've been struggling their whole lives. And so it goes through a lot of criteria, and some of the more commonly known ones that get discussed include beliefs. Like if we believe something's not possible, then it's going to be harder for the brain to let us do it. But what's more, we can believe that something is possible, but not believe that it's possible for us. And if that's the case, that'll make things challenging too. And then habits and comfort zones. But this goes actually quite deep. It goes into our self-image, our identity, core needs. It goes into authority issues. If we grew up around people who was always telling us what to do and how to do it, and what not to do and not how to do it, at a certain point the brain gets fed up and doesn't want to listen to anything anyone tells them. So although they might be capable, just because they'll have this authority issue response, their brain keeps them from doing things. And then it can also go into something that you might find interesting. So as I mentioned, I traveled to over 100 countries. And I've noticed different, I don't say this word perfectly, but peculiarities of different cultures. And one of the things I've noticed about the US culture is everyone here is trying to be different. Everyone and their mothers, whether it's by wearing different shoes, wearing different clothes, watching different shows, or eating a different diet. And it's ingrained in our media because it's a guy that's different that gets the attention, the success, and the girl. And it's in our advertisement because they're always convincing us to be different by buying their product. So what's really interesting is if a person sees themselves as different, then their brain will keep them from doing things that will allow them to continue to feel different. So if they think, oh, I'm not, I'm not a, I'm not a, let's say a jock or a nerd, and they say I'm different than that, then their brain will keep them from doing those things. And then if they don't do those things, they're not going to succeed in those areas. Make sense?
So what you're saying is there might be somebody who really wants to, I don't know, study physics. But their brain is telling them, I'm different from those nerds, and therefore, okay,
100%. And that
that
can,
makes a lot of sense.
yeah, and then that applies to a lot of different things. And it's really holding a lot of people back because there are some people who would love to be more studious, more maybe study physics, music, and whatever. But at a certain point, they decided that they were different. And
Mhm.
and now they can't actually do that thing just because they made that decision that they're
Yeah,
different and they're trying to be different. And it
yeah,
can work on many levels where a person doesn't just have to go against the mainstream. If their inner circle all listens to alternative music, they might say, I'm different and listen to mainstream. If
yeah.
everyone is doing yoga, I'm different because I do Pilates. Go ahead.
It was kind of a joke to me in college that because I was in music, I had to have black clothes because you always have to wear concert black.
Yeah.
And so my hair was long. I liked it long, wore it in a ponytail. And so here I am walking around all the time in black with my long hair and a ponytail. And the joke was that all the people who considered themselves sort of goth, I think was the term at the
Yeah.
time, were also walking around all dressed in black with
Right.
long ponytails, especially the guys. And I always just thought it was so funny. My gosh, at a glance, I might look like I'm trying to be goth, but
Yeah.
I'm wearing it because I need black clothes for all the performances. And I'm comfortable in black at that point. And in fact, it's taken me years to branch out into color.
Yeah.
But it's from well, not to say I'm different. It's just, it was the joke that you all think that you're so different and yet you're all dressed the same. And then I looked at myself and went, and I'm dressed like them too.
It is
So,
funny. So two things you said about that. So now a goth person, because they see themselves as different, and it's gonna limit what they can do. If they wanted to go watch a baseball game or do something that was much more seen as mainstream, it would be hard because they identify themselves as goth,
mhm,
and I don't know what their ideas of what they can or cannot do is, but it does limit them. But what's
mhm,
really also important is I was working with one client who had resistance, and it was because she thought she was different. And I'm like, yeah, but you wear pants and you're wearing a shirt and you live in a house and you have a TV in your house and you drive a
mhm,
car and you're speaking English. And so we like to think of ourselves as different, but there's so many things that we're doing that is so much similar that
mhm.
just because we watch a different show doesn't mean we're completely different from everybody.
Right,
The fact that we're watching a show means we're similar because most people are watching a show. And like you
right,
said, the fact that all you guys are wearing black, you're not as different as you think you are. So
right.
we play a lot of
So,
games.
I find your observation of American culture interesting in part because one of my recent guests was Jake Needham, who is an American who lives in, I want to say Bangladesh, Bangkok. And his book that he read from is set in Singapore, and he was giving me a lot of observations about cultural differences in Singapore in particular, and also in Bangkok, specifically that they're more kind of raised to say we need to all get along
Yeah,
and go along and be more unified rather than we need to all be unique and stand out in the crowd.
yeah.
And I thought that was interesting.
And if
Uh,
I can add to that, it's not just in Singapore and that area, but in most parts of the world, I noticed that there's more of
mhm,
a unity. We see the commonality in each other, and it
mhm,
brings us together. And I really pointed out the US because I noticed it's much more here. We are trying to be different and trying to
mhm,
be more individual to the point where it's actually kind of interesting. I do believe the reason we do it here is so that we could stand out and get attention. So,
I think it's partly our history too, you know, that we're a country who was built by the pilgrims who
yeah,
were different enough to say, I'm not going to go along with the status quo. I will get on a leaky tub and sail across the ocean
yeah,
and risk death to live by my beliefs. We were built by people like Daniel Boone. I'm not sure Daniel Boone, there are two of them that I always think of as similar, but people who are willing to cross mountains
who were
through uncharted
mavericks, and
territory.
yeah,
I actually live just south of the famous Cumberland Gap, which is where they first started taking people over into what was then called the West. I wanted to ask, one of your books is about improving concentration, organization, and time management. And I have kind of two questions. One of that is, why do people struggle so much with those things in the first place?
So I think the book you're referring to is mind mapping, and I happen to have that one up here.
Yeah.
You can't see it. And mind mapping is a technique of actually note-taking thinking that does help with focus, memory, and time management of that. And why do people struggle with it? It's hard to say why someone would have that. One is if they weren't trained. So our brain, in many ways, is pretty unrestrained. It's kind of going all over the place. Think of a kid in a candy store. And as we're growing up, if it wasn't trained to be more focused and organized and think timely, then it tends to continue to go in all sorts of directions.
Mhm.
And then also, it doesn't help that our media right now, we're just watching so many different shows that put us on so many different emotional highs and lows with so much thinking coming at us that it does kind of scramble our brains. It makes
Uh-huh.
it even more difficult to kind of think more linearly and go in a
Right.
forward
Well,
direction.
and my follow-up question was, when I read that, I thought this is exactly the opposite of ADHD. And I know a lot of people think ADHD isn't real. I've actually had kids diagnosed with that, and I still don't know if it is or not. But as I read that list, I wondered, is ADHD more of a cultural phenomenon of the world around us, just throwing so much stimuli and we don't learn these techniques?
I think it is. I tend to veer away from it being something that we're born with. I think it's something
Mhm.
that is developed, and it's developed for many reasons. One, I think a diet plays a lot into it. We're eating a lot more processed foods, and a lot of these are chemicals we're putting into our bodies that our body was never meant to have in and work through. So it is um making our thoughts race faster, making our thoughts
Mhm.
skip more. And the studies show it. There are certain E chemicals. So E chemicals are the chemicals that are processed in foods that have known to show signs of ADHD in kids. So food is affecting it. Now we're watching so much more media, and it's not
Mhm.
just media, but it's how the media is presented. So back in the 50s and 60s, I really like watching a lot of black and white movies. What you'll notice is scenes change less than every 5 seconds to 6 seconds, and sometimes
Mhm.
longer. Nowadays, scenes are changing under a second, and there's a lot
Ah,
more activity, pickers and banners and pattern interrupts and all of that. And so that's training the brain to hold attention for shorter and shorter period and
yep.
constantly be distracted by new stimuli. And so that's not gonna go when a person's watching a lot of that, that's not gonna not have any effect. It's gonna affect us. And so
Right.
our brains are becoming more scrambled, is looking for more stimulation in a shorter time, which is why we're getting triggered a lot more easier and why our focus is a little bit shorter. And then back to what you said, we're living in a time where there's just so much more information. There was something
Mhm.
I had heard that right now we humans receive in one day the amount of information that we would have received in a year 100 years ago.
My husband came across a similar figure, and I forget if he said in medieval times a person might have, I think the number was something like 50,000 impressions a day of a sound or a sight or, a sensory thing. And he said today, I don't remember what the number was, but it's more like, we get 1 million impressions or 2 million impressions a day, and our brains just weren't designed for that.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, part of what we're doing, so to my readers, why my books aren't getting out as fast anymore. In the last 4 years, we've moved from a completely urban lifestyle, shop at the grocery store, to we're now raising a lot of our own food.
I love that.
And yep. So, and some of my friends initially, they knew me living in a suburban house with, your eighth of an acre square yard and teaching music lessons, going to the grocery store. I was happy living like that. And, a lot of the political upheaval is why we did it. But at first, my friends were saying, are you happy? Are you really happy living like that? And we do have a farmhand who helps me out 5 days a week, but the days he's not here, or, as I referenced, I need to go out and get the chickens cooped up for the night. All I can think is this is the way we were meant to live.
Yes.
I go out and I've got grass and fields around me and trees, and the sheep are yelling at me to hurry up and get their food. Especially Crinkle. She has a big, deep voice, and it's hilarious. And, these chickens, like, I never wanted chickens in my life, but my gosh, they're hilarious.
Yeah.
And we have rabbits, and we've reached the point, going back to your comment about food, there are nights that about 90% of what's on our plate is what we grew or raised ourselves. And we've accomplished that in only 4 years. Still have some work to do. I have to learn how to, take down the deer in our backyard and butcher them, but
it is a lot of work, but I will say
it's rewarding.
Yeah, I struggle with a lot of qualities and characteristics that are being talked about with neurodivergence, whether it's ADHD, bipolar, autism, and all of that. In fact, it was a big weight on me for a large part of my life, not just growing up, but as an adult. In fact, the amount of effort that it took to manage what was going on internally was more than a full-time job. And I'd done a lot of work to get to this point where I can stand before you and talk and speak in a coherent way where you wouldn't think I'm like some sort of crazy person, because back then, in many ways, I was like that. And I've done a lot of stuff to get to this point, including changing my diet. I'm happy to say this year I haven't eaten out once. I've eaten everything from farmers markets that whose farms I've visited and seen their growing practices. I also recently moved up into the mountains. I actually have an acre of land now. I'm in more nature, more quiet.
Nice.
And I can't tell you how huge, I'm saying huge, profoundly big of a difference it's made in my inner activity, where I can be more
I
focused.
believe it.
And people would ask you the same question, like, are you happy? 100%. Of course.
Yes.
This is the way we were meant to live. Watching news, watching doom scrolling on social media with all these triggers and banners and people yelling at you, the smogs into cities, all of that stuff. You may not notice that it's there, but it's affecting your health.
It is.
And if it's not right now, it will eventually.
One of your books is about internal resistance. Do you want to tell my audience a little bit about that?
Yeah, so the internal resistance is less of a book, and it's a program I put together. So concentration was one of the last books I wrote. And in writing that book, I came to this concept of resistance that I had described earlier, where I was like, hey, wait a minute. There's a part of our mind designed to hold us back, and it's actively working to hold us back. And, resistance has 3 important concepts. The first is our wants and desires, because as I mentioned, our own wants can be a hindrance to achieving them. And I kind of alluded to why that is, because our brain is creating endless wants and desires. and it's creating them so much, it's actually difficult to focus on the one want we have. And that's only one challenge that the want creates. But once we have a want, then resistance checks to see if we should do it. And it goes through that list of criteria. And we just touched on a few things like the beliefs and habits and comfort zones
Mhm.
and difference, but there's a lot more criteria going on. So if a person struggles to do things, it's easy to assume is because they're lazy, don't have what it takes, or that they feel like they just don't have discipline. When it's not that, it's that they have resistance that is causing them to not be able to do things. But
Mhm.
what's actually more important to understand is when resistance holds us back, it doesn't tell us that it's holding us back. It doesn't say, well, this thing that you're trying to do, it goes against our beliefs, so I can't let you do it. Resistance shows up in manipulative ways. And our brain is very sly in how it keeps us from doing things. And some of the things of how it does it is pretty obvious. Like we'll fall into a pattern of watching television, social media, playing video games. And those are obvious tricks of resistance because when we're doing those things, we know we should be doing something else. But then there's more deceptive tricks, like falling into a pattern of over planning or getting overwhelmed or constantly telling ourselves we'll do it later. And when the later arrives, we push it off to the next later and the one after that. And what's really crazy is some people have been saying, I'll do this later their whole entire life. And every time they say it, they really think they're going to do it later. And so these
Yep.
are some of the tricks that show up.
Okay. Of all your travel, now, oh, I did want to ask you, going back to this idea of cultural differences, you had mentioned you now live in North Carolina, but you said you were born in Asia?
Now I'm in North Carolina. I grew up in Chicago.
Oh, okay. Okay. I
Yeah.
thought you said you were from Asia.
No, I grew up in
I
Chicago.
totally misunderstood
Yeah.
that. Okay. The reason I was interested in that was just if that's what helped you notice this cultural difference, but or about America, but it sounds like it's more all the travel you've done.
It's a lot of the travels, going to pretty much half the countries in the US and around the world. You
Mhm.
see people, there's very minute differences in a lot of cultures
Right.
and 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 nationalities. And it's been a while since I've traveled, but I used to pick up a lot more. But the one
Mhm.
thing that was very clear to me when I moved back is how much there's this drive to be different. And as I mentioned, I think this drive is really ingrained in we feel like we need to be different to stand out in trying to get attention. And
Right.
and what the difference is really doing is kind of like separating us versus actually bringing us together.
Well, I think there's I don't want to make a blanket statement. I don't think it's
Yeah.
true for everyone, but there was someone in my life who used to always she from a young age was getting tattoos, was getting multiple piercings, and that's fine if that's what you want to do, but she was coming to me and going, I'm cooler than you. I'm a
Yeah.
rebel. I'm this, I'm that. I'm so cool. And you're boring because you don't have tattoos. And I'm like, whatever.
Yeah.
And I think there is both an insecurity in it and an arrogance for some people, probably not for everybody.
It's
Some people love tattoos, but this attempt to stand out, to be different.
Yeah,
I
there's definitely insecurity, which is why the person is putting in all this effort to stand out. If there wasn't
right,
insecurity, then they could feel comfortable in not needing to stand out, or there wouldn't be a
right.
drive to it. And the superiority that you mentioned, well, Adler, he used to be a student of Sigmund Freud, I believe. He
Mhm.
said something that I love is that when a person has superiority, is because of inferiority. So
I've
when they
often heard that.
so
Hmm.
when there's superiority, it's actually both inferiority and superiority at the same time.
Right.
And yeah. And I'm not gonna say I'm above that because one of the my own journey of work is my own superiority. I've had a lot of that I've had to work through. And the only way where I actually was making significant progress was when I came to terms with the fact that it was driven by my own inferiority.
Mhm.
And that's tough
Yeah,
to
I
look
think
at.
there's a lot of that. So we are getting close to the sun going down, and
Sure.
as I told you, there are dogmen out there in the woods. I know because I listen to videos
Yeah.
while I'm working with the animals. So I'll have to take care of the chickens. But I'm interested in all this travel. What are some of your top 2 or 3 experiences that you've really loved?
Oh man, it's really tough to narrow down experiences. It's like trying to
I
pick
bet.
your favorite song. Like there's so
Yeah.
many good songs out there, and there's
Mhm.
many reasons why we like the songs. But I'll name one. I had a fortunate opportunity to go to Greenland. And Greenland's a place that a lot of people go to. And when I got there, there actually wasn't much. The longest road in Greenland was only a few kilometers, and Volkswagen built it so they can get their cars from the airport to the ice sheets to test their car in extreme conditions.
Mhm.
But I did take that road, and I slept in front of a glacier, and it
Mhm.
was a really amazing experience because as the glacier is breaking, it really sounds like thunder. So that was cool. I also got an opportunity to um, scuba dive with like 6 or 7 hammerhead sharks. It was
I
amazing.
saw that picture on your page, and you still have all your limbs.
And I still have all my limbs, which is
Very
amazing.
good.
That was in the Galapagos. I mean, it came out of nowhere and they were like circling us. That was
Oh,
really
wow.
interesting. And then
So,
I'll throw one more, and that's I had the fortunate opportunity to sleep in the oldest rainforest in the world
oh,
in
cool.
Malaysia in Taman Negara, which was a really cool experience as well. But they're just very little compared to all the stuff I've had the fortunate
So I
opportunity to
have
do.
to tell you a funny story, and I do want to know what the death road in Bolivia is, but I have to tell you a funny story about animals suddenly surrounding. I grew up in the military, so I've been to a fair number of European countries when we lived there.
Yeah.
And then my husband and I have taken a few trips to Scotland for research for my books. And then one of those times we were doing photography at a standing stone. And there are no trespass laws in Scotland. You can go wherever you want except into somebody's front door. And so one of these standing stones was in this massive, probably 100 or 200 acre field full of cattle. Well, they were way over beyond the ridge. So we walked about a quarter mile up to the standing stone that was fully fenced. And we're doing all our photography, and it's neat photography. And all of a sudden, my husband, Chris, said to me, Laura, you're not going to like this when you turn around. And I turned around, and the cows were steadily encircling this fence.
Uh,
And he always teases me because cows are pretty benign, they're not aggressive. And I always say they're benign and they're stupid. And that's where the real danger is. And so there was this narrow path from the standing stone to the gate to get out. I was wearing a full length, like down past my heels, medieval gown that we were doing this photography in. I was in heels like about that high. And we stood. I think I refused to leave for about 15, 20 minutes. And he's like, we're going to die of starvation here. The cows aren't going anywhere. So we started walking, and these cows literally walking shoulder to shoulder with us on either side. I was gripping his arm. I looked back, and there were literally like 200-300 head of cattle all on this narrow line in this long, long line that went all the way up more than a quarter mile up over the
oh, yeah.
ridge. And all I could think the whole time, I know they're not aggressive, but if I panic and start to walk faster, they'll start to walk faster. And at a certain point, they're going to be running.
Yeah.
And I'm going to die in a medieval gown, which I guess is a good thing to die in. But that was scary. And I'm curious, what was it to suddenly have hammerhead sharks all around you?
This was more when I had a bit of superiority, so I had a bit of,
Okay.
and I felt I'm glad I got over it because at the time it was great because it let me do these kinds of extreme things that I probably
Mhm,
wouldn't have done now. And so I think it just kind of fed my superiority. I felt really
mhm,
cool that I had all these sharks around me.
mhm.
I wasn't too afraid. I didn't think they were going to come after me. And it was actually a really cool experience. And
Yeah, and I think hammerheads are maybe less dangerous than some other types. I don't know that much about sharks.
well, what I've learned, I've been in the water with all types of sharks now, reef sharks,
Mhm,
white tip, black tip sharks, Galapagos sharks, even great white sharks, is
mhm.
somehow sharks know that humans take up more energy to digest than the energy they gain. So they're
Oh,
really not
interesting.
aggressive. But when I was scuba diving, there's a lot of bubbles. And I've
Mhm.
also heard is when sharks come to you, they're actually curious more than anything.
Oh,
And
interesting.
and I think they're bothered by the bubbles, so they keep their
Mhm.
distance.
Okay, I'll remember that if I'm in the water
Yeah,
with a shark.
yeah.
What is the death road in Bolivia? That was an interesting picture on your site.
Yeah, so there's this road in Bolivia that for years and years was one of the most dangerous roads in the world. I think over 200 cars have fallen off of that road.
Okay.
And they finally closed that road. And it became a tourist attraction where they take people mountain bikes and you mountain bike that
Mhm.
road.
Okay.
And it was really fun. It's still dangerous. Like in my group, there was a woman who ended up having a concussion.
Mhm.
But it was a road where back in the day that was really close to the edge. It was very narrow, so when two cars were passing each
Mhm.
other, it created a dangerous opportunity, and
Fall
many
off.
people didn't, yeah, survive in that road. And now it
So,
is more of a fun thing that people do with their mountain bikes.
right.
It's still not easy, and one needs to be careful. And again, that was during the time when I had a bit more confidence in doing those things. So I
Mhm.
was speeding down that road, no problem. But luckily, they gave us a lot of good gear to protect ourselves.
Yeah, that's interesting. There was a time in my life where I was a little more fearless.
Yes.
And I'm not going to say it's a good thing, but for me, that changed. Like I used to walk around Boston in the middle of the night.
Yeah.
I was coming home from work, not just roaming for the fun of it, but I had no fear about being out at midnight in a major city. And as soon as I knew I was pregnant, everything changed.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, being fearless for yourself is one thing, but now you have another life depending
Yeah.
on you. And I changed a lot because
Yeah.
of that. So where can people find you online?
And so I want to say that I have three free gifts for the listeners here. The first gift is a guide called Prompt Engineering for Your Brain or for Your Mind. And people don't realize, but the brain was the original ChatGPT, and you can prompt it to give you solutions as well as have you get yourself to do things. So they get that guide. Another guide called Build Habits and Behaviors in Your Sleep. It's hard to imagine, we spend so much time trying to develop habits or do things or stick with things, and it's impossible. But there are ways to shortcut the process. And that's a second guide they can get. And the third guide is on ending procrastination and sabotage, which more or less is the concept of our internal resistance. We kind of went very shallow about it,
Mhm.
such a heavy topic to go into. And there's a guide that goes more into detail. And they can get all three of them at my website, kamknight.com. That's KAMKNIGHT.com. And they can see some of and they're all free. And they can find my other books, courses, as well as doing one on work with me.
Okay. And what is your website?
It's kamknight.com. And to reach me one on one, it's a mentor at kamknight.com.
All right. And you can find me at booksandbrews.net, at lauravosica.com. That's where my books and trail to everything else I do online is. Our sponsor is at gabrielshornpress.com. Lots of great authors. And you can see our rabbits, sheep, chickens, and our dog, who looks like a big Yeti, at glenmurrayfarms.wordpress.com. Now, our next interview coming up for the Books and Brews full podcast is with Christy Wolf, who writes military-themed action novels with unforgettable love stories. And next up on Books and Brews Light, I apologize in advance, I'm probably mispronouncing his name, Dees Casillas, who is a comedian and author of neo-noir crime thrillers. And if you would like to check out some of our recent podcasts, we just had Jake Needham from Bangkok on, and Ashley Fontaine and Andrea Ems were on with their paranormal psychological thriller. And we are still looking for authors of Christmas-themed stories for December interviews, and any author of medieval fiction who either lives near or is willing to travel to Knoxville. We have an amazing place to do your interview. We just need the author. So thank you very much. It was a delight. Cheers.